Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on the rapidly growing business opportunities associated with growing marijuana. My name is Dave Harrison, editor of Greenhouse Canada and moderator of today's webinar. Just before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to thank today's webinar sponsors, Fafard and Gavita Horticultural Lighting. Thanks to them, we are able to present this webinar with free registration. And now a brief preview of today's presentation. There is certainly considerable interest in cannabis as a crop and its expanding market potential. It's in the news everywhere. The business opportunities becoming available as a result of the push to legalize large-scale marijuana cultivation are globally significant. This webinar provides a look into the state of the industry, as well as opportunities and obstacles that face both new and seasoned cannabis growers and investors. We are very fortunate today to have industry expert Michael Camplin from GGS Structures to lead this webinar. He will provide his insights as both an advisor and solutions provider of structures and growing systems for numerous licensed large-scale cannabis producers in Canada and the U.S. Please submit your questions using the questions panel on your GoToWebinar console. We have time limitations, but we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of Michael's formal presentation. Please note this presentation is being recorded. We will send an email to everyone who registered with a link to the recording that you can watch on demand. And now, over to Michael Camplin of GGS Structures and today's presentation.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you inviting me to speak today. This is the first Greenhouse Canada webinar on the topic of marijuana, and I'm excited to share what I've learned about this emerging industry over the last 4 years. Even though this is a Canadian publication, we have a lot of Americans joining us today, so I'm not only going to cover what's going on in Canada, but also in the United States, as well as a quick world overview. The cannabis industry is really getting interesting. Research from Marijuana Business Daily indicates that by the year 2020, the marijuana industry will have an economic impact of $44 billion in the U.S. alone. These are really exciting times for the investors and growers who are taking the plunge into this uncharted territory. Many hold the reasonable assumption that the ones getting in early will reap the biggest rewards as the government legislation on cultivation and sale of marijuana continues to become less restrictive. Before I get into my presentation, I'll give you a little background on myself. I'm the sales manager at GGS Structures out of Vineland, Ontario, and I've been doing this for nearly 20 years now. Before that, I owned and operated a garden center and wholesale greenhouse. During my time at GGS, I've always enjoyed the excitement of not knowing what is around the next corner. Sometimes I'll walk into the office on a Monday morning thinking I'm going to be in the office for the week, only to find myself on a flight somewhere within a couple of hours to sit with a customer and discuss a new opportunity that has just arisen. The marijuana segment of our business has been very similar to that. We were carrying on with our usual business of floriculture and vegetable greenhouses when the opportunity came up to intentionally equip ourselves to fully service the cannabis industry. 4 years ago, we began a serious discussion about what it would take to get there. We also initially debated what level of involvement would we have in this industry. This was an important consideration for us because we definitely didn't want to offend any customers who might have objections to the growing and usage of this plant. While everyone holds different beliefs and opinions on this subject, there's one thing I am now absolutely convinced of, that cannabis has great medicinal qualities when it comes to the management of pain, treatment of chronic illness, and other therapeutic benefits, too numerous to list. I think of one example of early on when we had decided to get into this. We were sitting in an office for a meeting, and I had a customer come in who was initially growing it for himself and looking to get a license to expand and help others also. He had MS, and before he started using marijuana, he was restricted to a wheelchair. And when he came into our office, he didn't even own a wheelchair anymore. He was carrying a cane with him in case he got unstable, but he said for the most part, he could freely walk on his own. If that doesn't convince you that there's some tremendous powers in this for benefits of people, I don't know what will. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, there is a global epidemic of prescription opioid use and addiction. It is estimated that up to 36 million people use opioids worldwide. More and more studies are emerging suggesting that medical marijuana is a potentially safer and more effective means of treatment than opioids. People sometimes talk about this being a gateway drug. I think the only gateway that I've seen is I've heard of people being rescued from something that is more addictive and are able to use something more natural and not harmful. Why wouldn't you use that? It's a natural product. Those getting into the business should, I think, at least fully educate themselves on the therapeutic aspects of cannabis before completely ruling it out. At GGS, we also wanted to decide if cannabis production was going to be a flash in the pan or if it was here to stay. We didn't want to jump into something new that wasn't going to be here, and we decided to make it a long-term commitment and fully get into the business. So in Canada, we have two programs that allow the cultivation of medical marijuana. The old MMAR program and the program that replaced it, MMPR. MMAR is Marijuana Medical Access Regulations. The MMAR program was created to allow patients to grow a very limited quantity of marijuana in their own homes or have a designated license holder grow it for them. There are currently 28,000 Canadians who have valid licenses. The current MMPR program was supposed to replace it and disallow these home grows. But due to a Supreme Court ruling that happened back in March of this year, these growers can continue to grow and ship to their patients. The Supreme Court gave the federal government 6 months from the ruling to come up with the new rules and regulations, and until then, no new licenses can be issued under the MMAR program, and only grandfathered in licensees can currently grow. Now we just need to wait and find out what changes will be made and how MMAR and MMPR can coexist. One of the caveats I have noticed with the MMAR program is its largely unregulated nature. Because the government isn't looking over the shoulders of these operations, the plant quality varies quite a bit from grower to grower. With this program, it really is buyer beware. You have to know your supplier and what his or her growing methods are. I've definitely seen some questionable growing practices, but with that said, I've seen some growers who take it very seriously and strive to deliver the best possible product to their patients. The MMPR program, which is Marijuana for Medical Purposes Regulations. The MMPR program was introduced to regulate the plant quality, security, and overall safety of cannabis production. This program is much stricter than its predecessor. Thousands of applications have been received, but to date, there are only 31 licensed producers in Canada, and 18 of them are in Ontario. The MMPR applications process is strict and rigorous and includes the following regulations set forth by Health Canada. All production sites must be indoors and not in a private dwelling. Physical security measures must be in place, such as visual monitoring, intrusion detection systems, visual recording devices, monitoring by personnel, and restricted access. Applicants need to familiarize themselves with the regulations relating to good production practices, which include product testing, storage of dried marijuana, equipment, the sanitization program, standard operation procedures, recall of product, and quality assurance personnel. There is a very limited list of approved pesticides allowed, and these are mild. Some growers have chosen to go completely pesticide-free. Zero mold or pesticide residue on the finished product is tolerated. Strict odor control measures must be put in place. We've been deeply involved with many of the leaders of the MMPR program. We're very impressed with the quality and integrity of these growers who strive for the highest quality product and promoting the highest standards of safety for their patients. I've been in many cannabis facilities throughout North America, and I have to say the Canadian MMPR cultivation sites that we have worked on are the most advanced and the highest quality that I've seen anywhere. Because Health Canada's standards are so stringent, and some say over the top, it makes it much easier for us to work with cannabis customers south of the border. That's not to criticize any of the U.S. regulations, but when you start out in a country that probably has some of the toughest large-scale growing laws in the world, that really prepares you to tackle challenges elsewhere. Thus far, the MMTR application process has been extremely complicated and time-consuming, with approvals often coming well after a year from the application date. I'm not saying this to discourage business from applying, but to advise that you really need to have a well-thought-out business plan before jumping in. Is recreational cannabis on the horizon in Canada? Beyond the medical program, one of the Liberal Party's campaign promises is the full legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes. Since the election, stocks in Canadian medical marijuana companies have continued to rise, largely based on the hopes that one day they will also cultivate cannabis for recreational usage. Sales are projected to be $5 billion annually if marijuana is fully legalized in Canada, according to CIBC World Markets. We have already seen some of the licensed producers taking steps to capitalize on this potential market. Recently, Tweed gained exclusive rights in Canada to some of Snoop Dogg's brand and content. Additionally, licensed producer CannTrust has created cannabis-infused coffee pods that can be placed in Keurig machines. Right now, this is directed at medical users, but I can certainly see how a product like this could easily be marketed to recreational users when marijuana is fully legalized. Intensifying all this hype was the announcement last month from the federal government to the UN that legislation to legalize recreational marijuana will be ready by spring of 2017. As of yet, we don't know many of the particulars. Laws must still be created that regulate the production, distribution, retail, and consumption of marijuana in Canada. However, this uncertainty is clearly not stopping enterprising individuals and businesses from trying to discover where they can fit into this future market. To get a glimpse of what recreational legalization could be like, we can of course look into the U.S. Recreational marijuana sales are legal in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. Although cannabis is still federally illegal, states across the U.S. are rapidly changing their marijuana laws. However, some states are opting to only allow CBD variants of cannabis under strict practices. As I said, things are changing very rapidly. Earlier this month, Alabama was CBD only, and now they're allowing up to 3% THC. Take a close look at the map, but there's a lot of information there, and we will make this available later to those who want to study it further. So who's next to legalize? Legalization for medical and recreational will only expand further, but let's take a look at what's coming up in the near future. Recreationally, these states are going to be on the November 2016 ballot for recreational legislation. California, this is huge, 60% support in California. In Maine, there's about 65% support, and in Nevada, 54% support. The states that are pending for medical cannabis legislation are Florida, Kentucky, Missouri, Nebraska, South Carolina, and Tennessee. As you probably know, Florida is currently allowing a limited number of licenses for Charlotte's Web only, but the medical is going to be on the ballot soon here as well. There definitely are some pretty interesting things happening in Colorado. The cannabis sales were $996 million in 2015. There's more than 2,500 marijuana businesses licensed in Colorado. Ancillary businesses are cropping up, such as bud and breakfast, app-based marijuana delivery services, consulting companies, and even dating websites for pot users. Total marijuana sales in the U.S. in 2015 were $5.4 billion, both medical and recreational. Let's take a look at California again for a minute. With a population base larger than all of Canada, California California's legalization would be a tremendous profit opportunity for cultivators. The Adult Use of Marijuana Act in California is steadily gaining popularity amongst voters, with 56 to 60% of voters supporting the bill. California was the first state to legalize medical cannabis in 1996, 20 years ago. As of this month, a measure to legalize recreational marijuana has received enough signatures and is headed for the November ballot. The cultivation, distribution, and sale of recreational marijuana would be regulated by the state, and exporting marijuana out of California would be prohibited, as it is in every other state. The Independent Legislative Analyst Office is predicting that annual new revenue under AUMA could reach up to $1 billion, and the state would save as much as $100 million a year on marijuana enforcement. Let's take a look around the world. Uruguay was the first country in the world to completely legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. To get access to marijuana, citizens can choose to grow at home, belong to a cannabis club, or buy it in a licensed pharmacy. Germany. Just this month, the health minister of Germany said that medical marijuana will be legalized next year. Australia. This year, marijuana was legalized in Australia for medical and scientific purposes. Israel. Medical marijuana is legal in Israel, and this country is widely regarded as an innovation hub for medical marijuana programs and studies. Jamaica. Earlier this month, Jamaica's Cannabis Licensing Authority has approved regulations for licenses, permits, and other authorizations for cultivation, processing, distribution, sale, and transportation of marijuana. So, where are the opportunities? Take a look at this slide that compares legal cannabis growth to other industries. You can see a lot of industries on there that are doing well, and then way up at the top, you've got cannabis. 232% growth is something to not ignore. Let's take a look at a SWOT analysis of converting your existing greenhouse into a cannabis facility. Strengths. As a grower, you have existing horticultural knowledge and experience. That's pretty important. There's a lot of people getting into this business that are, no pun intended, green and don't have the experience. You already have a greenhouse structure that can be retrofitted for cannabis growing. That is going to save a lot of time. Often when people want to get into the industry, they are in a rush, and having something already that's built, as you know as a grower, that saves months of time. You have existing supplier relationships, companies you can trust, like GGS. There's a lot of new companies out there, and again, people who are not in the industry don't have that benefit of knowing who they can trust and who they can't. Weaknesses. You may not have the capital to cover costs of becoming a licensed grower. Setting up for marijuana is more expensive than setting up for flowers or vegetables, so that's something you need to be aware of. You need to have deeper pockets than if you're just getting into the regular horticulture stream. Marijuana is a completely different market than traditional horticulture with differing customer needs. Growers really need to learn the business. Just because you know how to grow petunias doesn't mean that you're ready to get into the marijuana market. So you need to be aware of that. It is different on several different levels. Opportunities. Marijuana market is still in its infancy. There's more opportunity for profit at this stage. We're just starting to see the end of prohibition. This is the best time to build a marijuana brand. Taking advantage of all the benefits of growing in a greenhouse versus an indoor grow, for example, using natural sunlight to reduce energy usage, that's pretty significant. In Canada, grocery and pharmacy leader Loblaws has indicated interest in selling medical marijuana in its stores. If this happens, greenhouse growers could potentially leverage their existing supply chain, as a lot of product is already going through there. Threats. There's definitely big competition coming. People with a lot of money are getting into this industry, and you need to be aware of that. Increased government growing regulations can be costly to keep up with. For example, odor control, that's something you don't have to deal with at all with growing flowers. and security requirements. There's a lot of expenses going into this that are a whole lot different than the flower business. The marijuana market is still in its infancy. There are more opportunities for profit at this stage. We're seeing prices in the Canadian MMPR program ranging from about $3.50 to $15 a gram, with the typical price being around $7. This gives an opportunity to pay off capital costs of your growing facility while profits are still high. It allows you to make some mistakes learning the industry and still be okay. There will be a major wave coming when recreation goes through, so it's a good opportunity to get in before the market gets too crowded. As a long-term investment, it makes good sense to build state-of-the-art facilities and to build it now. Again, if you can pay it off now, and when it's paid off, you've got the best production facility, you're going to be better off than people trying to get in with the low-end facilities. We're just starting to see the end of prohibition, and this is an opportunity to build a brand, just like we saw at the end of alcohol prohibition. If you're already in the growing industry, existing knowledge of horticulture can be applied to growing cannabis. You already have an understanding of plant health. It's a different plant, but you know how to grow a plant, so you have a benefit. Knowing how to operate automation systems is a help. There's people getting into this business who don't have any experience, and this is all new to them. For you, it's just an adaptation. You've got confidence in crop production. Again, we've mentioned this before, but existing supplier relationships, you generally know who to trust. There's a lot of suppliers in this industry that are trying to take advantage of the newness, adding high markups and substandard product or old technology. I see that at trade shows. I see it in some of the consultants that are going around giving advice and telling people what to do and just looking for opportunities. You really have to watch out for this. There's light deprivation suppliers claiming to have invented this product. You know, we've been doing it for decades, and I've been reading things about people pioneering it in the last 3 years. Complete nonsense. You can use existing greenhouse structures to your advantage. Greenhouses can be retrofitted to accommodate cannabis growing. You've got to start with a quality structure. And again, there's a lot of people out there who are not familiar with greenhouses, and I'm seeing them buying stuff that nobody else would want to grow in. They're not good quality. You're not going to get good product out of them. Ideally, it should be hard glazed so you have an ease of cleaning. If they're an existing blackout system, which is known in the industry as light deprivation system, it can be used provided that it is in good condition without light leaks. Okay, so consideration for growers. When talking about converting an existing greenhouse operation to grow cannabis, I often hear people make the comment that it is just another plant. It's called weed for a reason, and it's not hard to grow. In a sense, this is true. It is simple to grow and can do well in the wild. But what growers should be asking themselves is what quality are they going to produce, and are they going to have a product that is highly marketable? This industry is quickly becoming very competitive. The ability to produce top quality cannabis and grow it efficiently is not only going to maximize your profits in the short term, but it is the absolute foundation of a sustainable business. If you produce low yields, low quality product, or plants covered in insects or mold, you aren't going to be in business for very long. With that said, here are some of the items to consider when planning your operation. The structure. The greenhouse length matters. The length of the greenhouse is a consideration for ventilation. If fan ventilation is being used, you want to avoid greenhouses that are too long to adequately ventilate them. And why would you consider fan ventilation? Primarily to control odor into one location. Greenhouse height. A taller structure gives you a more stable environment due to a larger air mass. It doesn't change like the environment does outside as quickly. Another height consideration is that the supplemental light should be plus or minus 6 feet from the canopy of the plants. Lights can be attached to the truss or attached to a uni-strut for positioning at different levels. Natural ventilation. When properly designed, natural ventilation is an amazingly efficient and even way to cool your greenhouse environment. In the traditional greenhouse market, well over 90% of what GGS sells is natural ventilation. Instead of having fans running constantly and using up energy, natural ventilation uses very little power to open and adjust the roofs and to keep a constant temperature in the greenhouse. However, if you're in an area where strict odor control is an issue that you'll have to deal with, it's harder to control odor without the use of fans pulling the exhaust air through an odor treatment system. I'll get into odor abatement a little bit more later. For those considering buying a used greenhouse, I'd really like to stress the importance of knowing what you're actually buying. There are a lot of people getting into this business without prior greenhouse experience, which is fine, but you need to know about the potential pitfalls of buying an existing structure. I've seen facilities bought and a lot of money paid for, and they're just not up to par. Light deprivation. A properly designed greenhouse is set up with consideration that a light deprivation or even traditional shade energy system is going to be added. I always recommend a horizontal truss in the greenhouse so the light deprivation system can be easily added. I see many greenhouse manufacturers requiring a partially sloped system to achieve blackout. This often adds complexity, frustration, and unnecessary cost to the project. I cringe sometimes when somebody asks for a freestanding greenhouse for marijuana production because it doesn't lend itself well to simple light deprivation solutions. While it still can be done, there are much better ways to achieve this. Light deprivation is nothing new. Growers that have been using it for years for crops such as mums, calanchos, poinsettias, and other flowering crops. Again, I think it's worth repeating that this has been part of regular greenhouse business for decades, despite certain marijuana industry suppliers claiming they've brought a brand new innovation to the table. For my customers who grow photoperiod sensitive plants, I've been keeping them supplied with effective light deprivation systems for years. For climates that need cooling during the blackout period, light traps are used to allow airflow through the fans, vents, and cooling pads without allowing light through. These systems can also be used to reduce the amount of supplemental light pollution coming out of the greenhouse at night. That is the blackout system, so be a good neighbor. Huge amounts of energy savings reflect the heat back into the greenhouse from the aluminized part of the curtain. Benching. Growing cannabis on benches allows for increased airflow around the plant, and when you add a liner, it's the perfect growing method for capturing runoff irrigation water. The use of rolling benches in a cannabis application is a complete no-brainer. Depending on the layout, rolling benches can increase your production space by up to 50%, eliminating the need for a dedicated aisle. I've regularly seen us use 85% of the floor space. You have to have the right layout for that to happen, but it certainly can be done. You can create an aisle wherever you need it for easy access to the crop. Production space is expensive, and rolling benches are the one decision you can spend the least amount of time on. I've provided them to both greenhouse operations and indoor grows, and my customers are always very happy with them. GrowNet supports. If you're new to growing marijuana, you won't be familiar with this product. It's an add-on for benches to support top-heavy plants as the buds mature. It minimizes the risk of stem damage, which could compromise the nutrient flow to the buds. Irrigation. It's important to start with good, clean water. For cannabis in particular, there are people who claim you always need to start with reverse osmosis water, but it really depends on the quality of your water to start with. RO is an unnecessary expense if you don't need it. At a minimum, RO is going to waste 25% of incoming water, and that's if the water's clean. However, if you need to clean up your water, it may be completely necessary. pH levels need to be correct. Accurate delivery of nutrients to your plants. Well, this is important in any greenhouse crop. It is much more important for your marijuana growing simply due to the high value of the crop. Capturing and recycling of nutrient water runoff is sometimes mandated, depending on your region. But containing excess moisture from irrigation is always a good practice for cleanliness and to reduce unnecessary humidity in your growing environment. Although recycling nutrient water is an upfront capital expenditure, it's also being a good steward of the environment and will save on nutrient costs down the road. Heating. The best heating for a greenhouse is hydronic heating or hot water heating. That is the use of a boiler and a circulation system to run hot water through your greenhouse. What this does is it allows convection to keep heat even in the greenhouse and to keep the plants drier. It also is a more even type of heating than unit heaters. Unit heaters, of course, are the lowest cost to get you started, and there are people who go that way. But if you really want to set things up properly, you need to take a hard look at hydronic heating. Okay, let's take a look at lighting. Supplemental lighting is used for both photoperiod and to ensure the plant has the ideal amount of photons on cloudy days. For those of you who don't know, cannabis needs 12 hours of light for flowering, and that's strict. It can't be more than that. And for veg, people run 18 to 24 hours of light. The most common by far is being 18 hours light cycle for veg. Because it is supplemental and not the sole source of light, the spectrum and intensity is not as important as it is indoors. Now, consideration needs to be made regarding the location, climate conditions, and cost of electricity when choosing the type of lighting that you're going to use. HPS, as I'm sure most of you know, that means high pressure sodium, is the most popularly used light source. When possible, the new electronic fixtures are used. 1000 watt is the most commonly used bulb. HPS fixtures are used in both veg and flowering rooms. Greenhouse structure operations do not need as many supplemental HPS lights as indoor operations because of the natural light provided. Indoor applications may use plasma lights to provide the necessary blue light spectrum for vegetative rooms. These fixtures are different than traditional metal halide because they provide UV as well as blue light. Plasma lights are very expensive. Because of the cost of lighting in general, it is less expensive to operate in a greenhouse, both on the capital costs and on the ongoing costs. LED lighting. Cannabis growers were among the first adopters of LED lights, and they're definitely driving the maturity of the industry as far as research and growth, bringing the costs down. Yield benefits can offer beyond the kilowatt savings. The wavelength and intensity you need when you need them with adjustable spectra LEDs, you have the opportunity to create what you want, unlike other light sources. Like field crop solar radiation, only more controlled. Longer life. LEDs have definitely a longer life than other light sources and reduced maintenance costs. And for indoor growing, you can be creative and have multiple level growing because there's not as much heat produced. Now, there's a lot more that we can go into on lights, but in the interest of keeping this to the length of time required, you can contact us for more lighting, and we can also put you in touch directly with the lighting experts for HPS or LED lights. Some of the facts of the costs here for indoor production are pretty interesting. 3% of all the power in Washington goes to indoor cannabis production. 3% of all power in California also goes to indoor cannabis production. 1% of all of the power in the U.S. goes to indoor cannabis production. It's equal to 20 trillion watt hours, or 20 million American homes. Greenhouse cultivation, on the other hand, uses up to 90% less electricity. So that's one of the main reasons we're looking at greenhouse production here. Sanitization. Be a clean grower to start with and keep a sanitary growing environment. As we mentioned earlier, hard glazed greenhouses are easier to clean up and easier to keep clean. Keep the floor clean of trimmings at all times. remove debris, ensure workers and visitors are not introducing foreign contaminants. You want to have Virkon mats, hand cleaning. A lot of places will have gowns or suiting up. It may seem to be over the top, but it definitely allows you to have a cleaner operation. I have some concerns when some of the places I'm visiting are not clean. I will then tell the next person I don't want to go into the growing facility because I don't want to take anything with me. Humidity control, that's pretty important for keeping the fungal levels down. Dehumidifying at night is probably the most important way that you can keep that under control. Pesticides are a hot topic in the industry right now. Growing pesticide-free may be the best way. Again, you got to be super clean. You need to exclude insects. Insects not only do damage to the plants, but they also bring viruses and bacteria into your greenhouse or your growing environment. Biological controls can be used. Predators or beneficial insects. There's a lot of research that's been done on the market in the traditional greenhouse market that lends itself well to marijuana growing. I've seen aloe concentrate used. It's not palatable to plants, to pests, I mean, and it also tends to make a very green plant. The nutrients are absorbed through the leaves. I don't know if that's scientifically documented, but I've definitely seen places that are using aloe concentrate quite successfully. Odor control can be a bit of a challenge. We know that carbon filtration works. It's used most commonly in indoor grows. The problem with the greenhouse is when you're flushing enough air through the greenhouse to keep the temperature under control, it requires a lot of filtration, and the carbon does wear out, needs to be recharged over time, and you also want to filter the air coming in through HEPA filters and so on, which greatly increases the static pressure and requires a lot of fan power to move the amount of air through that's needed. So we're working now with a system that will add essential oils to the exhaust of the greenhouse and destroy the compounds that cause odor. And we have very good hopes for that, but we're still in the investigation stage of that. For computer controls, whether you use warehouse growing or in a greenhouse, computer controls are the brain of the complete marijuana growing system. And it's something that you really shouldn't skimp on. There's some very minimal systems out there, but you've got such a valuable crop. It's well worth investing in a very good computer control system. You need to monitor and maintain exact environmental needs for your growing rooms, cloning rooms, and flowering rooms. Some of the things that you want to control are the nutrient system, and, all of the irrigation, pH, everything to do with irrigation. Lights, heating, your light deprivation system, humidity control, air circulation, CO2 levels. The entire system can and should be controlled by a computer system. And we also feel that it's important to have something that's very user-friendly. And if you look at the following slides, you see an example of how user-friendly it can be, so that at a glance you can see exactly what's going on in each of your rooms, and it's easy to make changes. You want a system that can be expanded on very easily and not need to go and buy a whole new system when you expand. So those are all the things that need to be considered when you're looking at computer controls. Okay, so let's take a look at some final thoughts for greenhouse considerations. First of all, there's no such thing as a cookie-cutter greenhouse design. Just because you're going to grow marijuana doesn't mean that there should be an off-the-shelf greenhouse that suits everybody in every situation. You have to have consideration of the climate that you're going to grow in, the amount of light in your area, amount of heat, and so on. I've seen kind of the same type of cookie-cutter greenhouses in different climates that just don't make any sense. Recently saw one in a southern climate that was designed with no consideration for the heat that needed to be removed. It's Also, you know, it is a greenhouse, and the purpose of the greenhouse is to get natural light in. And there's no need to black out all of your walls all the time. You can have light coming through the side walls and have vertical curtains to achieve blackout, which gives you a lot more flexibility so that you have light coming through when you need it and you have darkness when you need it. Fan cooling, again, if you're in an area that needs to control odor, it's easiest achieved with fan cooling, even though that's maybe not the first choice of greenhouse cooling otherwise. If you're in an isolated area and odor is not going to be an issue, then you definitely can look at natural ventilation, and that will save you a lot on electricity also. And if you are using a used greenhouse, you want to make sure that it is a quality, well-sealed greenhouse, and you know, if you're not starting with quality, it's going to cost you more to create what you want in the end than starting fresh. So in conclusion, marijuana is definitely an opportunity worth considering, but with any business, you have to evaluate what your core abilities are and what you really want to be doing long term. The marijuana industry is not for everyone, and I'm not suggesting you drop your current business without going through due diligence. Even with what we did at GGS, despite the fact that we invested a great deal into the marijuana industry, we by no means want to ignore our flower and vegetable business, which is the foundation of our company. And I would recommend the same for you too. If you have a business that you're focused on and is successful, that is your core business, and you need to be careful anytime you venture into something new. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm happy to take some questions now. I also have Bryce and Lee with me to trade off on questions and give my voice a break after this presentation.
Thanks, Michael. That was a very thorough and well-researched presentation on the topic. So now we do have some time for some questions. I'm just going to go through as many as I can here. We do have some time limitations. The first question would be, with all of the various components and variables involved in starting a project like this, where should someone start?
Okay, that's a good question. I'd like to give that one to Bryce. First, I'll introduce Bryce. Many of you that have called into GGS have probably spoken to Bryce. He's on the front lines when someone calls in. He's helped many, many people through the process of setting up a marijuana operation. Bryce came to us with great experience. He was the lead horticulturalist at one of the marijuana license applicants in Canada, and he has technical excellence, and really I always get great comments on how Bryce has helped people through. Bryce, do you want to field that question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the most common thing where, you know, you converse with somebody, you want to figure out where to start. So I think because every project's different, the first thing is to figure out what the market is, what you're going to deal with in that market, who you can sell to, how big it is, etc., what the regulations are. As well as if it's regulated, like are you competing for a license, or are there multiple licenses available? From there, you could consider your production style, or even how you want to market your products. Like if you want to have fresh product all the time and a consistent harvest cycle that's fluent, that's always a point of efficiency that if you start that from point day one, it's going to be beneficial down the line. I think from there, you know, those points should figure out your scale and kind of how you want to lay things out. And so that's usually get a floor plan going. And then from there, you can drop in components. Everything's rough, but you're moving from the beginning to the end. So when you make those changes, you're not changing everything. So you can throw in rolling benches to maximize your usable production space. From there, your lighting layout can reflect that layout. Your irrigation then can reflect your lighting layout, and your bench layout, as well as your room layouts. And then, you know, piece by piece, you can put in a control system for all of your other various components, and everything comes together. Your electrical, your cooling needs all become evident when you start from that starting point and work your way forward. So I think that kind of is how I would put that together.
Thanks, Bryce. As a second question, for greenhouse walls, what about security? Are there any requirements regarding this?
Okay, thanks. I'm glad that was brought up too, because I kind of failed to mention that when I was talking about greenhouse walls being opaque or clear. Different regions have different requirements on that, and it really does become something that you have to check with your local municipality. In most cases, though, the security for the facility is done with a fence outside of the greenhouse. So you already have your security, and you do have the flexibility of having clear sidewalls so that you can allow light through when you need light, and then you can block them out when you need to block them out. So typically it's not a security issue, but you would have to check with your local municipality.
Good, great. Another question, how much heat does each grow light add, and does this help for winter heating?
Okay, each 1,000-watt HPS, it depends on the light fixture, but a 1,000-watt HPS is about 4,000 BTUs of heat, and yes, a lot of people do take advantage of that for winter heating, because if you have a thermal curtain pole that reflects the heat back into the greenhouse, it also means that you need to remove that heat when you're ventilating. And a thing to keep in mind, I've had people make this mistake too, where they're calculating that they can save so much heat, but you're not running your lights at night, which is the coldest part when you're heating the most. So you need to keep that in mind.
A slightly longer question. I think you touched on this briefly, Michael, during your presentation, but the cultivation of marijuana that results in any single marijuana plant of a height greater than 12 inches is only permitted when the premises are equipped with a system that removes the odors of the marijuana being cultivated so that the odor is not detectable from the exterior of the business or from with any adjoining premises. How is the best way to deal, I guess, with this problem?
Well, it depends a little bit on the flexibility, how things are defined there, because in Canada also there is a zero tolerance for odor, but the zero tolerance does have a little bit of flexibility, as we found out, because in most cases you still can detect a slight odor when you're near the facility, especially during harvest time, late in the flowering time. But you can knock out the vast majority of that odor using carbon filtration. That is more costly if you're in a greenhouse, as we mentioned, because of the vast volumes of air moving through. And as I said in the presentation too, we are working on some very promising technologies to reduce that cost greatly. So zero is a tough number to make, but you can get pretty close to zero.
Good. Yeah. Another question. Do you foresee the licensing process opening up more now that the Trudeau government is in power?
Okay, for that question, I believe Lee is on the line here too. Lee is the president of GGS, and she's been pretty politically involved in the marijuana process, and I'm sure that's a bit of a speculation question, but Lee, are you there, and can you address that question?
Yes, can you hear me, Michael?
That's good, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a good question. It's certainly a question that a lot of people have been asking. Of course, the most exciting prospect is federally legal regulated adult cannabis industry, which certainly Prime Minister Trudeau was elected in part for this campaign promise to fully legalize marijuana. So while I'm an optimist, I'm also aware that some campaign promises are never intended to be met, and I think it's smart for people either currently in the industry or considering getting in the industry to, pay a lot of attention to the news and how it's developing. Minister Trudeau put an ex-police chief in charge of the marijuana regulations. I'd have to say that was perhaps a bit of a warning sign that he maybe wasn't as serious. And then in April, the health minister announced at the UNGAS special meetings for the UN that federal regulations in Canada are going to be in place for the spring of 2017, which is, a strong signal for legal intent. So we're encouraged, we're optimistic. We're definitely going to learn more this summer when the Canadian government restructures the licensing regulations for medical marijuana growers. This is the result of a February Supreme Court ruling that's making them change, and Michael addressed a little bit the difference between the MMAR and the MMPR. So we're waiting to see what that comes. That'll show a little bit where the government's intent is. Until then, I expect we're going to see continued slow advancing of new licenses, but I suggest you stay up to date on that information.
Thanks, Lee. Another question here. Our greenhouses are located near residential areas. Will that keep us from getting involved? Is anyone else in this situation that you're aware of?
Okay, you know, the question depends how close to residential areas and of course where you're located. I'm assuming this question comes from Canada, but I don't know. There's regulations that you know, are specific to schools and churches as well, but I guess the short answer to that is it seems to have lightened up a little bit on that. At first, it was very restrictive, and we're certainly seeing places that are successfully opening up that are closer to residential areas. But you know, that seems to be both a Health Canada question as well as a municipal question. I know of customers who have been approved at the municipal level, but Health Canada has rejected the application because of proximity. So it's not something I can definitively answer, but it does seem to be that that certainly some have gotten licensed with closer proximity than initially was required.
Thanks, Michael. Another question. How are the sidewalls of the greenhouse blacked out?
Okay, greenhouse sidewalls, in my opinion, the best way to black them out is with a roll-up blackout curtain, because that gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you the maximum light when you need it, and then when you want to black it out. These curtains are very good, and as I said previously, have been used for years and years. It's not new technology. There's lots of floriculture crops that require blackout as well. So in my opinion, that's the best way on the sidewalls, is to have that flexibility. There are some places that you know, that have used opaque walls all the way around, and that's okay, but you're going to use more supplemental lighting because of the shadows cast. One thing I'll add to that too, we tend to recommend putting in opaque end walls because that's where your ventilation is, and if you're using light traps on your fans and vents or cool pads, then it's much easier to work with an opaque wall.
Great. Again, just moving along. I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, Michael, you or your team, but what pH levels do you recommend for the various stages of the crop?
Bryce, do you want to jump in there and answer the pH question again?
Well, sure. It can depend on a lot of variables. That's probably evident, but you know, it could be depending on if you're a hydroponic grower, or if you're growing in a different type of media or soil, as well as your nutrient profile. I guess the best thing to when approaching this, rather than just using this is the metric, is to kind of look at what your nutrients are and what particular ones may be locked out if your pH swung too high or too low. Short answer, maybe for hydroponic growers, 5.5, 5.8 would be ideal, though it's one of those things. A lot of people are lenient with that and don't face too many repercussions. So in a media like a soil or something like that, you may grow something a little bit more alkaline, and yeah, it's just a matter of you may grow at a higher pH, a little bit higher than the 5.5 that I mentioned there. Anyways, yeah, I hope that was a succinct enough answer.
Thanks, Bryce. Yes. Next question. What should the light hours after buds have been set? What should be the light hours after buds have been set? Back to more than 12 hours or stay with 12 hours until harvest?
Okay, you stay with the 12 hours until harvest. There's basically 2 light cycles. The veg cycle, again, is typically 18 hours, and then to onset the buds, you need to drop to 12 hours. It basically tricks the plant into believing that it's the end of the season and time to reproduce, and then you remain at the 12-hour time until harvest.
Great, yes. Next question. We're getting near the end now, actually, of our allotted hours, so this may be the last question. It is, how do you recommend controlling nighttime humidity?
Okay, it's more of a challenge in a greenhouse than in indoor facilities again, but that's a wisely asked question, because the nighttime humidity is the important thing to control. And there's several units out there that are have been used. Well, actually, the 2 that come to mind most are Israeli technology. They've been used there for some time, and they've been in North America more and more with the onset of the marijuana market. But they are dehumidifier type units. One is an electrical unit that dehumidifies, and the other one actually has a brine solution that is a desiccant, and they're both a great way to reduce molds and mildews, and are being used quite successfully.
Great. Thanks, Michael and Bryce and Lee, for helping us out today with this presentation. We're just about the top of the hour. Just have some concluding comments. Listeners, of course, can contact Michael directly for more information. His contact information is there. I'd like to thank you personally, Michael, for taking time out of your busy schedule to discuss this issue, and your participation of you and your colleagues from the GGS is greatly appreciated. Thanks also to everyone listening in. I'm sure this has been a very educational session for you. And as we noted earlier, this presentation has been recorded. We will be sending an email to everyone who registered with a link to the recording that you can watch on demand. And in closing, of course, I'd like to again thank our webinar sponsors, Fafard and Gavita Horticultural Lighting, for their assistance with this presentation. Thanks, everybody.